Hey guys, what's up? It's Double Zug. So with Dragon Soul PTR coming and hopefully, God willing, the raid dropping pretty soon here, Firelands cannot end soon enough. We've been in here for too long and the healing is getting really boring. So I just went through the gear a little bit here. I'm going to do a bis guide here. Although, again, like I've said a million times, healing, there's not really like a strict bis list. And Dragon Soul is kind of similar to Firelands in that a lot of these slots don't have like a lot of options. You kind of just grab the highest eye level with the highest intellect because intellect is insane. So there's really not that much choice here. So really, I'm going to be focusing on like the three main choices that you're going to be making for gearing in this raid. And those three main choices are, do I wear 2-set or 4-set versus off pieces? What trinkets do I wear? Because there's a lot of good trinkets in this tier. And then last but not least, which weapon do I equip? Because there's some crazy weapons going around in Dragon Soul, as well as the legendary. We're going to be talking about this little goofy Pez dispenser looking thing, which I'm going to be telling you to equip because it's insane. Before that, let's talk about tier. So what is our tier set bonus? The 2-set is whenever you cast PI or him. So Disc actually gets to double dip on this, whereas Holy obviously doesn't have PI, so they're kind of screwed on this one. You get 25% mana cost reduction for 23 seconds. So what is this actually worth? 2-set value means that if we PI on cooldown, which you're probably not going to be PIing exactly on cooldown, so you get 19.2% uptime on this, which is 4.4% mana reduction on average. So how much healing is that really? Kind of difficult to estimate, difficult to model that precisely, but I'm just going to estimate at the end here. So whatever. And also with him, you're going to get like that 23 seconds, but minus the duration of him, which is going to be like 7-8 seconds, right? You're going to get 15 seconds extra uptime from that once per fight. So I just kind of estimated like this game is going to make up for the fact that you're probably not going to be pressing PI on cooldown, so 4.4% number is probably fine. I just estimated it's like a 3% healing increase. This could go up or down depending on if you are actually spending all your mana. If you're not spending all your mana, then this is worthless. And if you are spending all your mana, this is pretty good. It's like 900 HPS, probably about. Also, this does negatively interact with Jaws because it's a mana cost reduction, but we're going to be unequipping Jaws pretty soon in the tier, so not super important there. So that's 2-set. I would recommend just always getting 2-set, unless you're like pure DPS parsing. You might grab, like Shadow tier because it's haste crit instead of spirit. But if you're looking to do HPS at all, I would just always grab this 2-set and try to spend all your mana. That's 2-set. Let's talk about 4-set here. So our 4-set is a little bit complicated, so bear with me here if you're not like mathematically inclined. It says your Power Word Shield has a 10% chance to absorb 100% additional damage and increase the mana granted by Rapture by 100%. Well, what this does is gives us 10% more healing from Power Word Shield, as well as 10% more mana from Rapture. There's going to be some variance here, but over the average, over the fight, it's going to average out to 10%. Most fights, on like mixed raid damage fights where you're going for HPS, Power Word Shield plus Glyph is like about 13% of your HPS. That part of the tier set is going to give you 1.3% increased HPS, which is about 400 HPS. Maybe a little bit higher in Dragon Soul Abyss, I don't know. And then the 10% more mana from Rapture is actually more valuable than the healing, surprisingly. So in current gear, it's like 260 MP5, but in Dragon Soul Abyss, it's a little bit, it's going to be a little bit higher than this, maybe 300, maybe 280. So that's like 800, maybe 1,000 HPS. So you're going to be totaling like 12 to 400 HPS from this 4-set, which is actually pretty similar to the Firelands 4-set. Although the value from this 4-set is again highly loaded in that mana regen, so if you don't spend all your mana, you aren't going to actualize all that increased HPS. So I made 2 sets here, one with 4-set and one with 2-set, and now I'm going to talk about the benefits of going 2-set with off pieces versus 4-set. So the main benefit here is going to be being able to drop some of these like Spirit Mastery tier pieces, especially if you go for the Gloves of Liquid Smoke, which are 416 eye level, so 6 eye levels higher than your tier. They're crit haste piece, and they have 2 red sockets, which is huge, 20 socket bonus as well, which is really, really powerful. You can put these in a 4-set setup, but you have to wear a Mastery tier piece on your chest, which is a kind of bad. Mastery doesn't really do very much for us, honestly. It's a pretty bad stat. In this like 4-set list, I actually put I put tier gloves on just because this is a more realistic list. You're very likely to not be getting prioritized for these gloves, honestly. I believe these are like cloth DPS offset for like almost all the cloth DPS. I can't imagine you'd pick anything else. That eye level is just really nice. So if you're going for like damage, You can always drop the healing tier. But if you are going for HPS, I really wouldn't drop 4-set. It's just not the small amounts of like optimization in your secondary stats that you get from doing a 2-set off-piece setup is just not worth it. You maybe gain a few hundred HPS in terms of like having a little bit more optimized stats, but when we look at how valuable 4-set is, it's about 12 to 1400 HPS. You're just never going to make this up in additional secondary stats. Really, it's just mostly the gloves. And again, you're just going to have really high competition for these. And you can also just slot that in over like Robe of Glowing Stone if you do end up getting those, and just put tier here. And you really don't lose that much. You just lose a little bit of haste for mastery, which isn't the end of the world. So that's 2-set versus 4-set. I would just go for 4-set for HPS. Now I'm going to talk about breaking your Firelands 4-set really quick here. So you should have full 391 tier by now. Firelands 4-set is worth 1400 HPS, and so it's probably not going to be worth, but might be close to break 4-set for double 2-set if you have normal eye level. If you have any heroic pieces of the new tier, it's probably worth to break 4-set for 2-set. Although it's really not a huge difference either way. All right, we've talked about tier. Now I'm going to go to talking about trinkets. But before I go to trinkets, I'm going to mention very quickly the rings. There's 3 basic caster ring options. There's the spirit ring, the mastery ring, and the hit ring. These are all 3 just fine for discipline priest. The hit ring is pretty good. The mastery ring is not great, but it's about the same as the hit ring. So any of these you can get, go for, even if it's a hit ring. Don't be scared off from the hit, but they're all pretty close. All right, so let's go into trinkets. This is going to be a long one. There's a lot of trinkets. I'm going to try to go through them pretty quick here, so bear with me. So there's kind of like themed trinkets in Dragon Soul. There's like these stacking primary stat trinkets that are very, very good. They give you just an insane amount of primary stat. And the intellect one is the first trinket we're going to be talking about here. It gives you 99 intellect for 10 seconds, and it stacks up to 10 times. So this is kind of like Illustration from Wrath if you played back then. It takes a long time to stack up, but that 990 intellect is absolutely insane for us. It's really good for damage. It's really good for healing. It's like about 5,000 HPS, which is kind of crazy from that intellect. The one thing about this trinket is that it does have the potential to drop if you cast too many non-atonement spells. So if you're really blasting HPS, pressing like Prayer of Healing, and it has the potential to drop, and if it does drop, it's slow to stack back up, which is pretty bad. Also, on pull, it takes a while to stack up, assuming there's no pre-pull cheese like there was with Illustration, where you can proc this with a spell while you're out of combat. So this is going to have probably pretty high competition, but it is going to be very good for both damage and HPS. So if you can get your hands on this trinket, go for it. Next, I'm going to talk about Heart of Unliving. So this is a similar stat stacking trinket, but it's spirit instead of intellect. We also get a little bit of base primary stat on this. So it's 364 intellect, and then 990 spirit from the stack. This is much less good for damage, but for HPS, it's similar. It's about like 4.2k HPS versus 5k, so a little bit less, but not like hugely less. And again, this is going to have like way less competition because DPS players are never going to want this. So, if you can grab this, it's still a very, very strong trinket. It's better than all the Firelands trinkets. All right, next we're going to talk about Bottled Wishes. So this is a Valor trinket. It's deterministic to get off the vendor, so that's positive for this trinket. It's passive of 570 haste rating, and then a spell power on use, which is 430 average spell power. This is going to be good for damage. You can obviously line this up with Lust. The haste is good for damage, but overall this is just not a great HPS trinket, and there's probably better options for your damage. Although again, this is Valor, so if you are going for damage and you just don't have the access to the DPS trinkets that are more contested, you can just always grab this if you want. But again, for HPS, it's just pretty bad. It's not great. All right, next we're going to talk about another powerful DPS trinket, Cunning of the Cruel. Although this one is a little bit better for HPS as well because it has that 517 big chunky passive intellect, which is great. This is 84 intellect over the Firelands trinkets. That 84 intellect is worth like 400 HPS. So just from that, it's going to be pretty close to something like from Firelands in terms of HPS, but you also get this very powerful damage proc. So what this does is on a 9-second ICD, which is very short, right? It's pretty short ICD, 45% proc chance. This is going to proc a lot, and it just basically does like a big AoE Shadow Bolt volley to everyone within 10 yards of your target. So anytime there's cleave, this is going to be really powerful. So if you're going for damage, you can grab this, but again, this is going to be highly sought after by a lot of your DPS players, so good luck. Next, we're going to talk about Insignia of the Corrupted Mind. So this is another 517 passive intellect trinket. So again, we're already 400 HPS higher than the passive intellect from the Firelands trinkets. So our proc doesn't have to be that good to be better than something like an eye or Jaws. So what proc do we get here? This is when you deal damage, you have a chance to gain 3,300 haste rating for 20 seconds, 15% proc chance, and about a 2-minute ICD. So pretty long ICD here, but that's a lot of haste, right? That's like a mini lust there, very powerful. Not as great for HPS as it is for damage. Pretty nice for HPS, especially, again, given we're going to have a lot of intellect and regen, so we can afford to go a little bit more into haste. This trinket's going to be like, 3 to 4 KHPS. But again, that long ICD, as well as being wasted during Lust, if you are GCD capped on something like Smite, is a little bit of a downside. Although you can pre-pull, like swap trinkets, put this on ICD, and go into the fight with 30, 40 seconds on the cooldown on this, so you don't proc it during Lust. But that's kind of an annoying quality of life thing, right? So this is going to be pretty good for damage and decent for HPS. So if you can pick up one of these, go for it. It's going to be an upgrade over your Firelance trinkets either way. Next, we're going to talk about Seal of the Seven Signs. So this is, if you look at this, you might even think this is just the same trinket as Insignia, and it basically is the same trinket, except instead of proccing from damage, it procs from healing. You're probably more likely to grab one of these than an Insignia because this is going to have less competition because your DPS players aren't going to want this. So it's basically just the same thing as Insignia. Because we're a Disc Priest and we have atonement spells, you can proc either one of these trinkets just fine. All right, next we're going to talk about Reflection of the Light. So this is another Valor trinket. This is a passive spirit spell power on use. This is just a bad trinket. Just don't use this one. It's bad for damage and HPS, so I just would completely ignore this. Kind of doesn't exist. All right, so last but not least, we're going to talk about Windward Heart. So this is an interesting one. You might think it's just basically eye, but higher eye level at first glance, but there's a big difference between this and eye that's pretty significant, which is the internal cooldown is only 20 seconds instead of 45. The healing proc itself does about 70-75% of the healing of eye, but it has less than half the ICD. Eye is 500 HPS. This is more like 800 HPS as a proc. So this trinket is just a nice little decent role player. It's a strict upgrade over eye. It's a little bit better than Jaws. So if you can grab this, it's great for HPS. It's a little bit weaker for damage, obviously, but it's still a damage increase over those Firelands trinkets that are just intellect. So that's trinkets. Just a quick tier list of these trinkets. Will is going to be the best. And then Insignia, Seal, and Heart are all pretty much equal. You can just kind of grab whichever one of these drops that you can get your hands on. And then Windward is a little bit worse than everything else. And then the rest of the trinkets are worse than these. So really, any of these trinkets, honestly, that you have equipped, you're going to be within a few hundred HPS of the absolute mathematical BIS setup. Just kind of follow your heart on this one. Pick whichever one you think is cool or fun. Honestly, the difference in math and throughput is really not that big. So just go for whatever you can get your hands on, whatever you think is cool. All right, boys. Now it's time to talk about weapons. This is the good part of the video. There's some really crazy weapons that drop from Deathwing. And there's a theme here, kind of like the theme with the trinkets, with the primary stat stacking. These weapons all have no secondary stats, but very powerful procs. They have some crazy effects. So the weapon here you might be most familiar with is Gurthalak, which is the big two-hander melee sword that just procs the tentacles that just blast. But there's similar weapons for all the other roles. So the ones we're going to be talking about here are going to be Mob the Dragonlord and T-Talk the Steps of Time, which has just a mouthful of a name there. These are all higher eye level than a lot of the other options, right? They're 416, but they lack those secondary stats. So what I'm first going to talk about here is just what you lose equipping Maw over something like a Vagaries of Time. Obviously, if you equip this, you'd get a socket and you get crit and haste. And that is worth about 600 HPS, right? So just equipping something like a Maw or a Wrath Rack or a T-Tac or whatever over Maw, you're going to lose 600 HPS. So the proc has to be better than that secondary stat value. So that's just our baseline there, right? We lose a lot of secondaries. So really here we're looking at HPS and DPS, right? So what's our best HPS option? What's our best DPS option? Our best HPS option is going to be by far and away Maw the Dragonlord. This weapon is insane. The proc is healing spells have a chance to do a conal heal in front of you, healing for 6 to 9k. I believe it has a spell power modifier, and it also is modified by crit, which Disc Priest has quite a bit of crit. So it has, again, a 15% proc chance and a 17-second ICD. So this proc is insane. It is a huge amount of HPS. It's well worth the loss in secondary stats. This is like kind of a secret healer legendary weapon, honestly. It's busted. It's super fun to play with too. You get to see this thing going off. You can turn on your healing combat text and just see a bunch of numbers flying everywhere if you want to be blind. So this weapon is insane. It's like super fun. I would recommend just equipping this, and who cares about DPS? But if you are looking for DPS, you're really going to be comparing your legendary weapon, which is obviously Dragon Wrath, with a couple of other options, right? You could use like a main hand like this, which just a 410 secondary stat main hand with the offhand. I don't think that's ever going to be competitive in terms of DPS with your Lego. But the other option is actually another proc weapon. So like I said before, we have Rathrak, the Poison Mind, which is very similar to Maw in that it just has stamp, int, spell power, and no secondaries, but its proc is your harmful spellcasts have a chance to poison all enemies near your target for 10k danger damage over 10 seconds. And again, that's the same 17-second ICD. So potentially this actually does more damage than the legendary. We'll just have to see how it works out in Sims. So potentially you can get it both an HPS and a DPS upgrade with Rathrak. The other weapon that we should talk about here is the mouthful of a name staff that I mentioned before, which is again T-Tac, the Steps of Time. This is going to be an odd one. It's again, same thing, stamp, int, spell power, and no secondaries, but this proc is a little bit different. So it says your spells have a chance to grant you 2200 haste rating for 10 seconds, and this is the most important part, 435 haste rating to up to 3 allies within 20 yards. And it has a 50-second ICD, so it's kind of a long ICD. But the fact that this gives allies around you haste rating means that any kind of DPS players that want to like cheese parsing, they're going to be bugging you to stand 20 yards away from the raid stack so they can stack on you and 100% get this buff. You know, for cheesing parsing, this could be a thing, but for your personal HPS or DPS, this weapon is not good. So if you're aiming for those things, just don't put this on. There's no way that the raid DPS you get from this is better than like the DPS you get from the legendary or from a Rathrak or something like that. So really the only situation where you're going to be equipping the simp staff is to cheese parsing for like your buddies. So that's weapons. Again, I would just recommend you do anything you can to get your hands on this Maw and just blast with it. It's going to be super fun. That's what I'd recommend. So to wrap up here, I'll post these 2 lists here, but again, healer build lists are kind of a meme. Go for your 4 set. Go for eye level, try to get a good weapon, try to get good trinkets. Don't worry too much about, slavishly adhering to a bis list. If you like this video, I'm going to be coming out with more Dragon Soul guides, stuff like that. And I'm also going to be doing some mob content as well, so you can subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. Thanks for watching. See ya.
Swobu. Zug zug.